here's Brody Brazil.
I took all the photos you're about to see myself at Candlestick Park back in December of 2013. And full disclosure, I have shared these before here on YouTube, but the last time I made a video, I didn't have this telestrator technology. I also didn't fix up the photos very much. So 4 years ago, I made a video. It was fine, but I think I can do better here and now, and I'm excited to present Revisiting Candlestick and everything I saw and observed in this grand tour from December of 2013. They brought the media in right after the 49ers had played their final game that season. They let us walk into all the places that you did see on the field, behind the scenes, in the locker rooms, in the offices, all the tunnels and hallways. So there's a lot to digest with these photos. I'm just so glad they let us do this. I'm so glad I took these and hung on to these. And what's crazy is that as we'll go through these photos, like in my mind, this still exists. I mean, in reality, it doesn't. But in my mind, I can close my eyes. I can walk out here on that field. I can see those orange seats. I can see those tall light stands. I can see a 49ers football field or a Giants baseball diamond. Those things are long gone. This entire venue and facility, it was demolished more than a handful of years ago. So it's kind of crazy to look at this, to remember this, to revisit this and feel like it's still there, but it's definitely not. Let's begin the tour with probably where I parked my car, or I think it was a truck, back then in 2013. So there's that famous Candlestick Park sign that used to say Monster Park or 3Com Park. Had a lot of names over the years, but Candlestick Park is what we always knew it as. However, let me begin with some trivia here. Did you know that Candlestick Park was originally, like during construction and its very first few years, it was actually known as Harney Stadium, Harney, named after the landowner and what turned out to be the general contractor of the stadium's construction, Charles Harney. So imagine that. We know it as the Stick, Candlestick Park. Its very first name was Harney Stadium. Obviously, that never stuck with the Stick. There we go. But I mean, just what a famous view. I mean, this was such a typical 60s and 70s sports stadium across our country. A lot of concrete, which we'll get into the history of that in just a second. The tall light stands. There was always this hill just west of the ballpark, which I feel like just the wind would come around here and be even stronger. This stadium was built initially as more of just an open stadium, and then it was fully enclosed and encompassed the playing field over the years. But that's just such a typical and traditional look at Candlestick. And again, the tall light structures here. Interesting story, and this is not even urban legend, this is true. There was a worker that was actually climbing, and I think it was this one, or it could have been this one, or maybe even this one, climbing one of these light towers to go fix like a wind decoration. They had some decorations here for the 89 World Series in October of 89, and apparently one got tangled in the wind. So they sent up a worker because they said, hey, on television, we want to make sure this looks good. They sent up a worker. That worker was so rushed to get up there, they didn't even tie themselves like with the climbing apparatus to the light tower. They didn't have like the hook and the rope and all that stuff. They just hand climbed. And I think the person was like halfway up here when the earthquake happened. And that person was literally hanging for their life. I've done a video on this before. You should check it out here on the channel. Maybe I'll link to it down below, but pretty crazy, right? To know that backstory. And this was kind of the stadium's look right here of the steel that was holding up the concrete. And look, I mean, you can see the age and all the water and liquid stains over the years. And, it's kind of amazing, too, that the 49ers outlasted the Giants for more than several seasons. Like the Giants moved at the end of 99 into 2000 into downtown San Francisco within Pac-Bell Park. But the 49ers continued playing for more than a decade at Candlestick Park. So I'm glad to see that it was maximized until the very end. Here is an original plaque from the construction of Candlestick Park, and I apologize that the contrast here makes it hard to read, but it says dedicated April 12th, 1960. So as I said before, during construction, it was called Harney Stadium. They eventually said, well, you know what? Sorry, Mr. Harney. We're going to call this Candlestick Park. And just to reminisce again about the names on that plaque and just the history and how long that stadium stood. So that plaque was part of it. There's also this bench. This is the Anthony Morabito bench. And I don't even know if a lot of it. Comment down below, by the way, if you are a Giants or a 49ers fan or you went to Candlestick and you even knew where this bench was. It was kind of on one of the bus loading areas across the street. But that bench was initially put together for Kezar. And when the 49ers played over at Kezar, their owner, as you can see here, the headline from the Chronicle, and I don't know what, 1950s at 2? Barely can read that. Their owner, Anthony Morabito, died at a 49er game at Kezar. And so there's photos of this actual bench on the field at Kezar Stadium, and they moved it over to Candlestick when the 49ers eventually moved. And by the way, here's another crazy piece of trivia. Did you know that the Oakland Raiders, for 1960 and 1961, they actually played football games at Candlestick Park before the 49ers even did, when they moved there in 1971. They were at Kezar first, then they moved over here to Candlestick. Crazy, right? The Raiders played at Candlestick and called it home before the 49ers ever did. Now, the history of this bench, now you understand why it was at Kezar. It was a memorial to their owner, Mr. Morabito. They brought it over to Candlestick. I never knew where they took this bench once Candlestick was leveled. People have told me that it exists somewhere in North Beach, like in San Francisco proper. I haven't seen it. I don't know that to be true. I'm pretty sure they didn't take it down to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara. But let me know if you know where this Morabito bench even exists, if it does today. All right, again, that sign, that famous welcome sign, which was always there as long as I could remember it, going to Candlestick as a kid. But covered up, obviously, because, well, and this was for the final season, like that logo and stuff. But it used to have so many different names. I feel like the header of the sign changed like 8 times in the existence as I ever knew it. But they decided to just kind of tarp it over for the final year, but kind of crazy to see that as you drove in and now know that none of this ever exists. And look, so many different add-ons over the years, and you can see like this stadium was built and then it was added onto and built around, and it kind of had a real tall, majestic look and feel. And it kind of sat up a little bit, like we're obviously just a little bit above sea level, maybe a few feet. But as you walked up to the stadium, it kind of sat up even higher. And in just a second, I will show you that press box elevator. I don't know if there was only like 1 or 2 elevators in the entire facility, which is crazy, right, to think about a stadium. But that was a pretty interesting elevator to go up, and I'll talk more about that in a second. The escalators were also very famous or infamous, depending on how you see them. To get up to the upper levels, yeah, you would hop on an escalator, which just seems more like a shopping mall or an airport. That just doesn't seem like a great way to get a bunch of people up and or down at a stadium. And that was one of the problems of Candlestick, is that the elevators went up for the first half of games, and then they switched them. Literally, they would flip the switch, and then they would go down for the second half of games. But what if you needed to go upstream or upstream up or upstream down, depending on the opposite direction of traffic? It made it really difficult to navigate Candlestick Park if you were sitting on one of the top levels. And plus, I got to say, like, those escalators were pretty high. And if you think about like looking down when you were at the very top, and I don't think there was much of a railing going up. I remember being younger and looking down and going, whoa, that's a long way down, and I'm on a tiny little escalator. So kind of a weird thing to have in your stadium. Now we're in the players/executive parking lot. So this was an interesting sign. Park. I think it says park at your own risk. No, it says, please do not ask players for autographs. Non-compliance may result in ejection. There's no smoking around here, but we're down at the players' parking lot. And then there's also this. Jed York's parking space. But wait a second. Do you really think that Jed York was driving a Ford F-150 back then, or did somebody park in the CEO's space? You can barely read it, but that's Jim Harbaugh's parking spot. That's Trent Baalke's parking spot. So all of the high-level executives, and look at Jed York even gets a space in between. So they had a plush parking lot. But again, I'm pretty sure they knew that Mr. York was not coming back at that point, so somebody parked in his spot. All right, this is the press box elevator. We'll take you up to the press box in just a second. Only one way up. Well, there were stairs, but you had to go, I think, to the 3rd level first and then take those stairs. And, oh, man, I mean, look, it's all caged off. And look just how you were doing like a high wire act just to get up there. That elevator broke more than the Oakland Coliseum's lone elevator breaks, and still breaks to this day. It was an interesting ride. It was a very rickety ride up that elevator. And it's almost like the Tower of Terror. I know it's not called that anymore in Disneyland, but riding that ride when you're going up it, you're like, is this thing just going to fall out of the sky? Fortunately, never did as far as I know. This is the view from the press box. I'll let you soak this in for a second. I mean, just kind of a famous view of all these, what would have been so like the baseball field, let me do this again here. The baseball field used to go like this, and there was a fence out this way. So this is kind of like this is the right field area out here, left field, center field, and home plate's back over here. But those stands, they used to get removed, obviously, for baseball season. There was kind of a pavilion seating area out here. And then they would come out and stay out for football season. Now, obviously, for the 49ers' final decade plus, when they were all alone at Candlestick, those seats stayed out permanently. More on that in just a second. By the way, as we look at this grass field, which at this point, like they've played their last game, they're starting to let this go. Like it still looks fine and playable. It's a football field at the end of the year. Did you know, though, that Candlestick featured AstroTurf from 1970 to 1978, almost the full decade of the 70s? It was an AstroTurf fake grass field. Also did you know that Richard Nixon threw out the first pitch of the very first Giants season of 1960? So there you go. Like the infamous nature continues. Richard Nixon threw out the first pitch for the Giants' first game at Candlestick Park. But again, just an overall like typical and traditional look of this stadium. Now we're on the field to show you exactly where that press box is. It got super hot up there. I think I've got another photo up next to show you like literally what a greenhouse it was. And to be clear, this is the football press box. The baseball press box was more traditionally behind home plate. So two press boxes for a multi-purpose stadium. This is what it looked like up there. You can barely see all those fans, that row of fans and TVs. You understand they put those in after the fact because this literally was, and especially in the morning hours, like a big greenhouse. Got super hot and congested. I mean, you can see how, like, once you put chairs here, you can barely walk in behind. This was a very tight, crammed space for a lot of media. There's one row, there's another row up here. They all have a good view. Great vantage point, just very cramped up there in that press box. I remember there was like a free food area, but you had to like go down a tunnel to get to it. It was quite obscure. And things were very analog back in the day. Oh yeah, they kept score of all the other games going on. They would update them here on this grease board, but to the point, like literally somebody would handwrite all this in. And again, this is all stuff that, nowadays it's on a computer screen, it's on a monitor, it's for everybody to see, or they don't even have it because, well, everybody's on the internet, everybody knows. But back then, things were, like I said, a little bit more analog. Okay, those right field / sideline seats, the temporary ones that went in and out that I just showed you, this is what was under them. Like literally, I shouldn't have done green, this forest growing underneath those stands. Now, you understand that by the time the 49ers were playing their final games and Levi Stadium was already being built, like they knew that all of this was eventually, going to get torn out. But yeah, like there's like full-on trees and plants growing under these seats. And this is that structure here. You can actually see, like, take note of the track right there. That's where the seats go out and in. They go out and get pushed back in. So all of this is more temporary seating that kind of became permanent as the 49ers stayed there. And this is the actual, like, traction system. I mean, does that stuff look, like, rusted and welded over? Do you think those spider webs would indicate that has moved anytime? No, it obviously hadn't. Once those seats were out, they pretty much stayed there for good. But that system with motors and what looks to be like a big bike chain right there, it looks like we're missing a screw here too. This was the system to bring the seats out and in at Candlestick Park, and this is what was underneath. And this is the area. So this is where the right field pavilion seats used to be. So like these seats would come down in here, and they would fill this area in with seats. So this would be the right field, like I think it was called the Family Pavilion. And I'll show you the out-of-town scoreboard, which is right above that. But all of this is kind of like big empty area, and eventually it turns into storage, like once the 49ers were there all by themselves, they started to take advantage of this space. I mean, look, there's a modular building under there. So they weren't going to move these seats anytime soon, but they used to have to when the stadium was shared between the Giants and 49ers. Another look underneath. So this is literally under the bleachers. And again, like, why are there those weird, because this is temporary seating, those weird big cracks. And as you think about it, like those are prime 40 and 50 yard line seats right there. Even if all those could have been filled in with seats, you're talking about thousands of dollars in every single one of those gaps right there. But ultimately, they were temporary, and that's the way it was. There is the baseball out-of-town scoreboard that still continued to exist more than 10 years, like 13, 14 years after the Giants moved out. That out-of-town scoreboard still existed with the old Giants logo there, an Office Depot logo, and Jelly Belly, the gourmet jelly bean factory of nearby here in Northern California. Jelly Belly was a sponsor of that scoreboard, and all that stayed intact underneath the stands, and fans probably had no clue for more than a decade as they came to 49ers games. By the way, more Candlestick trivia for you. Did you know that in the year 1999, Candlestick Park was set to host Super Bowl 33? They were all set. They were lined up. They were awarded the game. But eventually, they moved that game to Miami. Why? Because the NFL took away Super Bowl 33 because, well, here's a look inside the visitors' locker room. Candlestick Park was supposed to have improvements made to it. They never did. And so because of that, the NFL said, well, sorry, we can't do this here. You didn't hold up to your end of the deal. We're moving the Super Bowl to Miami. So there you go. All right, this is the visitors' locker room. Now, this was used for both football and obviously the baseball teams that came in and visited. And just how, is that wallpaper up there with the texture? Those fans, how 90s or 80s or 70s is this? And this carpet, hard carpet floor, had probably been replaced dozens of times. It gets super nasty inside a wet, sticky locker room like this. But even look at the visitors' lockers. It's actually a pretty wide and deep locker, I do have to say. But nowadays there's nice swivel chairs, and each one might have its own screen inside. There's usually a security lock box, a safety box, or there's a rack for clothes. Man, that is a pretty cut and dry locker stall right there. There's not much in the way of amenities. Here's another look at this. This is the visiting locker side. Now, this was down the right field line for baseball and on that far southeast end zone side for football. And this locker room and the visiting baseball dugout on the third base side, they were not connected in any way. So to get here, you would have to go down, I take it back, on the field. You'd have to cross the field. The Giants and 49ers had to go through a tunnel to get out to their dugout or their field entrance. But the visiting team would have to walk right out on the field from that right field southeast area. I thought it was cool in this visitors' locker room how they had all the stickers. And this is actually two different photos here, 1 and 2. They had stickers of all the visiting teams that would come in. And a lot of these are helmet decals. I think one from the Vikings or from the Lions. But I thought this was cool that somebody was a Sharks fan over time and had a San Jose Sharks sticker. So visiting teams that would come in, they would leave their stickers, although you can see, hum baby, let's do it again in 1988. So, man, I hope somebody saved all this stuff, right? I hope somewhere, somehow, some way, all of that still exists. It's just too classic to have thrown away. All right, here's a look inside the 49ers locker room, and it was a two-part locker room because they combined the Giants and 49ers locker room. So eventually, they had two massive locker rooms for the teams. But even, again, look at the lockers. That is not a lot of space. A chair barely fits in those lockers. At least they've got hangers and a rack to hang their clothes and jerseys on. A lot of fans because it probably wasn't well ventilated as it should be in modern times. I don't even see big screens up here. There's really not much. And there was this upper level up here, and then you walk downstairs here, and there's this lower level. So again, the 49ers did take advantage of space once the Giants left. I took this photo because I'm not sure fans ever see this. Inside of baseball and basketball and hockey and football locker rooms, there's all this stuff from the league about notes to the players, how to wear your uniform. In this case, what pads and protection are legal and which things you can wear and how to wear them. In this case, tackles that are prohibited. So it's kind of like the lunch break room of a typical office. That's what this area is. And this is right out the door of where players would hit the tunnel and go out to the field at Candlestick. So it's kind of like the final thing you see. This is another look inside the 49ers locker room that was, and you can clearly see that we're under the stands here. This is kind of a middle area between the two locker rooms that they combined. This was the upper portion of the locker room area. I feel like this is the area that I recall more going into and covering 49ers games and post games over the years. At least they did have one television there. Oh, look, a Joe Montana jersey. We'll get into the jerseys in just a second. I think I see Jerry Rice over there too. But, they tried to play into a little bit of the history and legacy of this room and the colors, but it's still pretty simple. All of this, again, on a whiteboard, on a grease board. All of this is done now on computers and screens and like PowerPoint presentations nowadays. So it definitely shows its age more than 10 years ago since I took these photos. All right, you got Y.A. Tittle, you got Steve Young, and you got the person who I was named after, all quarterbacks up there. That's John Brody's number 12, hanging up inside the old 49ers locker room at Candlestick Park. So it's pretty cool that they did that. They tried to make it a little traditional. Wow. You think about millions and multi-millions and tens of millions of dollars that teams spend on their players and keeping them healthy and safe and strong. This was the training table. I mean, look, and what does a training table need to be? Like, not much, something you sit on or lay on or whatever. And I'm sure all the tape and everything's updated, but man, look at, like, if this training table could talk, look at the handles right there. Like, this looks like an original from the late 50s or early 60s at Candlestick. And the leather that's probably, I would hope, have been replaced a few times over by that point. Like, that is a very archaic looking training table. This is the door out to the hallway, which takes you out to the field. And I got to tell you, the hallway, we're looking on the other side of the door now. Again, nowadays you've seen the team entrances and all the LED lights and how things glow and there's fire and stuff coming out. I mean, this is literally the door that the 49ers used to walk out of. I mean, like, who did that stencil job up there? There was nothing glorious and glamorous about this. And this is that long tunnel, which would eventually take you from the locker rooms out to the dugout and then eventually out to the playing surface at Candlestick. Now, this hallway, I mean, it's hard, the photo can't do it justice. Maybe it's 4 feet wide and maybe the floor to ceiling is like 7, 8 feet high. Like, it's really cramped in there. If you're claustrophobic, like, you probably wouldn't like being in there. And I know some people were in that tunnel when the earthquake happened, October 17th of 89 in the World Series. At the end of that tunnel is obviously a cool photo of Bill Walsh and the plaque dedicating the field to him, Bill Walsh Field, on September 10th, 2007. A nice little tribute there to the 49ers legendary head coach. So Bill Walsh Field, they got to name it. This is one of the last things that players saw exiting the tunnel, going out to the field, actually coming up the steps out here in the dugout. And yeah, this was a baseball dugout that they didn't really fill in. They didn't really demolish it or take it away. I always wondered why. Was it just too expensive to have more seats or cap it off here? They kept the baseball dugouts at Candlestick even when the Giants were gone for more than a decade. They made them more football friendly, and I think it was even like a media rest area at some point. They used to give us like hot dogs at halftime. Have us go sit in the dugouts. There was no better place to be. But yeah, I think they might have made this into a fan amenity type area eventually. But yeah, that's like, there's no questioning that was a baseball dugout right there at Candlestick. There's yours truly. And again, I'm glad I went this day. I'm glad it was a beautiful day, not raining. I just wanted to be on the field. I'm actually probably not far away from where the final out was made in 1989 in the World Series when the A's swept the Giants in 4 games. Other than that, I'm kind of on this eastern sideline right here. Here's those temporary seats. But yeah, you know what? Now that I look back at this, I look a lot different, I think. I'm glad I was able to do this and hang on to it. Okay, this is a piece of concrete and actual steel rebar that fell off the stadium during the quake from the upper sections of 51 to 53 when the quake happened on October 17th, 1989 at 5:04. There was some damage to Candlestick, but obviously they had to go and survey the entire stadium to make sure they could continue playing baseball games there like 2 weeks later, 10 to 14 days later. But this was actually a piece that fell off the stadium because of the earthquake. There's a photo of where it fell off, but they decided to keep this. Look, I hope somebody still has hung on to this too. You'd have to think somebody did. And there was some wear and tear, like of the stadium. I wanted to make sure too that as I toured this place, you could easily see why it was getting replaced. Like when you can see the exposed steel and rebar and the concrete starting to break up and fall away there, you know that there's kind of an aging issue with that stadium. So it needed something. It needed to be fixed up or it needed to be totally gutted and torn down. And that's what happened. It's torn down. It doesn't exist anymore. I always thought this was cool as much as we could be down on the field and in the locker rooms, like to just show you what the fans saw. And somebody pointed this out on Instagram when I posted this photo recently, like that's how I remember it, which I thought was pretty cool that fans would remember it this way from their perspective, and the ramps and the concession stands and even like a Gordon Beer sign over there. This was the lower concourse. I think that was like kind of around home plate. Another trivia piece of information here for you. Did you know that the light stands at Candlestick Park were officially the tallest in professional sports? And did you also know, look, they're attached here to the stadium. Maybe they did that after the 89 earthquake. I'm not sure why they were the tallest in pro sports, like if there was a specific need for that, or that's just the way they designed it, or they never knew how high the stadium was going to go. But in early years of the stadium, when the lights were put in, they were the tallest in all of North America for pro sports. Also, did you know this, as I move on to the next photo here, Candlestick Park existed for more than 50 years, but only had one college football game ever played there. It was Cal against Fresno State. It was the 2011 football season. Cal that year was renovating Memorial Stadium in Berkeley, and so they had to play all their games at AT&T Park, Oracle Park, the baseball stadium, but there was a baseball conflict early in the season, so they played one game, and it was the one football game ever played at Candlestick Park between Cal and Fresno State in 2011. More views from the fan perspective, and I mean, this is so typical and traditional of a 1950s or prior sports stadium. It had all those support beams, and those would get in the way. Like if you sat behind that, you're looking at a pole that covered up left field or center field or right field. So they don't do that anymore with stadiums. But I mean, just look, I find this so cool and so, I don't know. I get sentimental about looking at stadiums like this with the second deck hanging over, and it was all covered here in the first deck, and it just, like, there's not another aisleway here. There's not exits to club seating here. I mean, this is just kind of how stadiums used to be. A lot of seats, a lot of fans. I'm not saying that was great, like, aisleway-wise. Like, look how long. If you were to go all the way down here, like, that's a lot of stairs to go up or down. I know they make stadiums more fan-friendly these days, and I appreciate that. But I get nostalgic looking at old stadiums like this. They don't make them like they used to, and for good reason. They'll never make them again like they used to. Here's another look, and you can kind of see, I think this would be like the handicap area section of seating, but you were like really far under that overhang, which quite honestly wouldn't be a bad place to be when it got super windy. There's also this, the view from the concourse looking into the field. I mean, how many stadiums even have this anymore, where it's like doors that open out? I mean, those doors, and I do remember every section and every aisleway having those doors. Nowadays, they want you to be on the concourse, and you can still peek down onto the field. So when you go get your beer, you get your food, you can see what's happening. I mean, look at Oracle Park, how that is on the lower level. But back then, it was like not only was it shut off by concession stands, you couldn't see the field. They also had those doors, which opened and closed. And maybe there was an effective wind. Maybe they put those in to try and mitigate the wind, but those were unique. Cool to look at the stadium layout and the seating chart here. And again, this is what, let me do this in a better pen here. This is what the baseball field alignment was. And you can see how the football field is laid out. So the Candlestick had this unique, if you look at what color should I do here? Blue. If you look at like the shape here, I don't even know how to describe it. There's kind of like one angle, two angles, the curve here, this side, this big curve. Wait, I did 2 4s. You dummy. 5, 6. And there's like 6 different angles here to make the shape of Candlestick. It's not a square. It's not a rectangle. It's not a octagon. I mean, it was such a weird shape. And obviously part of it was that the stadium used to, man, it's just hard to find the right color here. The stadium used to end like here and here. It was more of just a baseball only type stadium, but then obviously they filled it in and made it the multi-purpose venue that it continued to be for decades. Another look at a place the fans used to go. This is from the lower levels to the upper levels. You can see that if you go up here, you go to the Lexus Luxury Suites, the Stadium Club, the Hofbrau, the Extra Point Sports Bar, and the upper box and reserved seats. And there were a lot of seats, and this was that temporary section. So on the temporary section, it literally went from the field level all the way up to the top of the second deck. It's crazy, right? Like you could literally go, like on these temporary seats. There was no mezzanine level. There was no middle range. Like you would literally be up at the top deck and have to walk all the way down. Like that is a big hike all the way back up those seats. So wasn't perfect. Yeah, there's a better view of it. I mean, look at literally from down here touching the field, there was no break. All seats. And yeah, the luxury boxes were all on the other part of the stadium. But that was kind of unique that Candlestick had that. One more look at the other side. So this is kind of like the third baseline and the western edge of the stadium. I think officials sat up there above the press box. But yeah, there were these luxury suites, which I'm pretty sure were added to Candlestick after the fact, maybe in the 60s or 70s. Here's a look at the north end zone. And it's kind of weird and eerie that like they'd played their last game there. And this was like they were done taking care of the field, but the paint on the end zone was still there. And it was just, that was it. This is the last time that 49ers logos and emblems were ever painted on the field. By the way, the catch, which I'll show you in just a second, was just over to the left. But they had all these markings and decorations, and I give the 49ers credit. Like, they really made sure that they said a farewell. They said a good farewell to Candlestick Park. Okay, this is the spot where the catch was made. Joe Montana to Dwight Clark. The catch happened right here. That's why everybody circled around that. In fact, you can't tell, but those of you who are friends of this channel know that that is my friend Casey Pratt. Well, I can't remember if he was still working for NBC or Comcast at that point, or if he was on to ABC by then in his next media job. But anyway, that's Casey covering all of this too. But this was the person giving the tour. And yeah, they're literally talking about that spot right there is where the catch was made. And you could kind of tell, like, look at the background and even look at the misty haze of that December day. Kind of feels like a day where that 49er Cowboy game happened and where Dwight Clark made that famous catch. There you go. Farewell Candlestick Park. They really took the time to tribute this place, to send it out, to make sure that fans got to appreciate it. And you know what? They honored it till the end. The stick, part of their tradition, part of their legacy. Playing in San Francisco still, which is something they don't even do anymore. So they got to take over the stadium in the final years and really make it their own. And again, like, just kind of shuffling through all these photos here, it really brings me back. It really makes me feel like I could still walk into this place. I'll give you a quick little backstory. I used to be able to shoot the games, like videotape the games when I worked for Channel 2 and 36 back in the day. And a lot of times I would sit right there on the end zone. I mean, what a better seat than right there on the end zone. You have to be careful about a receiver running a route and taking you out at the end. But a lot of times the play would be coming right towards you. So I do have fond memories. And I mean, like, literally that spot right there, just a few yards back, is where I'd be able to sit. How about this? Another trivia piece of information I wanted to pass along here. Candlestick Park was the first pro stadium across North America that was built entirely from reinforced concrete. So back in the day, it would be a lot of steel in construction of stadiums in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. But Candlestick Park was the first in North America that was built from reinforced concrete. One more while I'm here, because I'm almost at the end of this list. In the 1961 All Star Game, and the pitcher's mound would have been right out here. Stu Miller, in the ninth inning of that All Star Game, it was so windy for the Midsummer Classic, which, as you would expect, middle of the summer, it's windy on those nights. It blew Stu Miller off the mound of the All Star Game in 1961. So there you go, a little bit more trivia for this video. Okay, I mean, I had to get that in there, right? That is my namesake. I was always glad to see that the 49ers, when they got to take over the stadium and really make it theirs and honor their former players. And yeah, I mean, that was pretty cool to look up and see, like, oh, yeah, that's my name, and that's why that is my name. But this place, honestly, had aged so much and so much character between the Giants and 49ers over the years. Like, if those seats could talk. And man, that does not look like a comfortable place to spend a lot of hours. And I realize that modern seats today, like, they're a little bit more ergonomic. They're not that much better. But I mean, when the label of the row is even falling off, like, you knew this stadium had kind of reached its service life at the very end. And so I hope people have a lot of these seats. I hope people can cherish some of these memories. I know some people do have seats from Candlestick Park, but yeah, just you will never go into a stadium in 2024 and 2025 and beyond. Like, I don't think pro sports teams will ever let stadiums get like this anymore. Sports are too big. Sports are beyond the point of even multi-purpose stadiums anymore. So you won't see this anymore. And you know what? Probably for good reason in a lot of different ways. This is the last photo, and I'll end with my last fact here. The Beatles, they actually had their final concert ever as a band at Candlestick Park, August 29th, 1966. And full circle to that, Paul McCartney did his final ever concert, August 14th of 2014, which I believe was that the final event, or did they play one more soccer game that summer of 2014, right before they started tearing it down? Yeah, about 10 years ago right now. But it kind of full circle that Paul McCartney got to close it out with his final concert at the same place the Beatles had their final concert in 1966. So, a long trip down memory lane. I certainly hope that you enjoyed that. I appreciate you for checking out this video and staying here till the end. And since you've done that, do me a quick favor. Thumbs up down below. That'll greatly help me and this channel and this video succeed. It'll help more people see this. I would like that, but I would love it even more if you just take 1 second, go down there, hit that subscribe button, so I can definitely see you back here next time.